Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. So, welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, where we invite guests from across the local national politics to talk policy and process, hear how things work, why they're important, and what they actually mean to you. So, what are we doing this week, Ian?
Well, it's a strange one. We usually broadcast live on a Sunday evening. So if you're joining us live, we've chosen a Monday night, not just out of tardiness coming back from a splendid Christmas and New Year break, but as we speak, there is an inauguration going on. It's Trump 2, the sequel. So yeah, I think everyone anticipant, not one they ever expected was going to be made. So hopefully we've got a guest who understands more about this than we do.
Yes, we have, rather than just us two prattling on. So for all the important questions, how does an inauguration work? Why does the US have such a run up to an incoming administration, unlike the next day affair that we seem to have in the UK? What does it all mean for the rest of the world? And will Elon Musk stop tweeting? To all of those important questions, we've invited along Lee Sartain from Portsmouth University. Welcome back, Lee.
Hello. Oh, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me back.
Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
putting myself in the picture. I very much enjoyed last time. It was a nice little chat we had, and as you know, I completely got the election wrong. So,
well, yeah, we touch on that in a second, but to be fair, we all completely stuffed that one up and missed it up. So we'll love to.
Company.
Well, let's crack straight into it. So in that respect, how the hell did we all miss that?
I think there's a good reason why we thought he wouldn't win.
Mm-hmm.
One was, I guess, just desperate hope, and that's always a problem when we come to predicting anything. But I think there was good reason. We all thought it was going to be very close, and I do remember saying it could go either way, but I thought it would just tilt towards Kamala Harris. Gosh, remember her? Don't we forget people very quickly? One reason was I think his first administration was chaotic. And we all just got a headache from listening to him all the time. That is part of his the beauty of Trump, shall we say. He's on the media all the time, so we don't think about anything else but him. So the chaos of his first term. There was also a lot of Republicans who jumped ship, who said they were going to vote for Kamala Harris. People that had actually worked in the first Trump administration. So it was seen that even the Republican Party wasn't going to get behind him. Then there was the problem of COVID-19 and Trump going on about injecting bleach and all kinds of nonsense. So I thought perhaps people had seen through some of that kind of bluster when, people are actually dying from COVID. And the other thing was that he just denied what happened in the 2020 election when Biden won, claimed he didn't win, tried to overturn the election. Then January the 6th happened. So a lot of the information together, I thought Americans probably wouldn't go back to that kind of chaos. The other thing was in 2022, the midterms, which was a vote for Congress, not the presidency in 2022, a lot of women came out to vote against Trump because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which was the women's reproductive rights in the United States. And that was overturned by the US Supreme Court. So in 2022, the Republicans didn't get the red wave, red for Republican Party. It's very odd in America. The right wing are red and the Democrats are blue. So in 2022, they also didn't get that red wave. So it looked like women would come out to protect their rights, their reproductive rights. And that was shown by the midterms because the Republicans didn't win across the board and so forth. And we were wrong. Women particularly white women, came out to vote for Donald Trump. Although in local referendums in particular states like California, Wyoming, Mississippi, across America, they voted to retain their rights at a national level. They thought Trump obviously offered something that Kamala Harris didn't. So in the end, it was the economy. It's the economy, stupid, as we always say. And it was inflation. Inflation corroded all of Biden. and the Democrats' support. So it wasn't the abortion election we thought it was going to be. It was the economy, which absolutely unforgivable. We should have seen this kind of coming. So Trump talked about inflation, he talked about immigration, and it was those two things together, I think, which really drove him to win in the election.
Okay.
That said, it wasn't a complete landslide, as Trump keeps telling us, till we start to believe him. In fact, it's very close, again, very similar to 2016, very similar to 2020. So if 115,000 people, I just checked this,
Hmm.
had voted differently in those Rust Belt states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, as Wisconsin, Kamala Harris would have won. But she wouldn't have won the popular vote. She would have won the Electoral College, which we talked about
Hmm.
last time I
Yeah.
was on. So it's not that kind of landslide. I mean, it's a convincing win. I'm not kind of saying it's not, but it's these are the past three elections have been extraordinarily close.
Yeah, it
And
wasn't quite the like you say, the overwhelming landslide. I've got some graphic up at the
Yeah,
minute.
excellent.
Trump
Yeah.
had 77,302,000 odd votes, and no, yeah, and Kamala Harris had 75 million and 17,000 odd votes. So it wasn't quite I mean, obviously, that's still 2.3
Oh yeah,
million more. It's still enough. At the end of the day, you've just got to win by one, but
absolutely.
not quite the massive kind of landslide. But electoral college wise, it was 312 to 226, wasn't it? So
Yeah, I mean, it's a convincing win. It's
mhm.
not a
Yeah,
landslide that
there's no
they're
way to say
claiming that will
that.
be remembered in history. It's not
Yeah.
FDR, it's not Reagan.
Mhm.
It's not those kinds of wins. It might have been that a black woman was on the ticket. I don't see a lot of evidence for that, I must say, at
Mhm.
this point. That might turn up later, but I think Kamala Harris was just seen as the incumbent. She was labeled as being Biden's, well, vice president, which she was.
Mhm.
She actually did say in an interview that she wouldn't have done anything differently to what Biden had done, and that wasn't seen as good enough by most Americans, I think. So Trump was seen as the insurgent candidate.
Yeah,
It,
it was a
it
year
is
in which
fascinating.
incumbents got kicked, wasn't it? Sorry, Ian, go
Absolutely,
on.
yeah. Good
No,
point.
I think there's one of the fascinating elements to this, Lee, is that I think, is there something about the fact that we seem to see things very differently on this side of the pond? We covered it a lot last time, a sort of incredulity that almost Trump was even considered a credible candidate. So there's got to be some, and I always worry about going down the misinformation route. The fact is that 77 million Americans
Mm.
made an active choice for Trump. Is there something we're missing, or do you think it is just that sort of confirmation bias that we see
Yeah.
in the US media that means if that's the way you lean, um, you tend to end up leaning further that way?
Yes, I think we have to accept the fact that some people like Trump. I think this is, and they like what he says, and they think he is a successful businessman, and he will make America great again, as he keeps saying over and over. And certainly in America, more so than this country at the moment, there is an information bias. People will just go to get confirmed in their beliefs. There's no balance in their media at all. So all that stuff about Donald Trump being prosecuted for the January 6th attempted insurgents, that he got prosecuted for being for sexual assault, for various felonies. People just assumed it was Biden going after him because he had control of the Justice Department. Whereas on the other side, we can all see that yes, he did commit treason. He is a felon, and he is a sex pest. Can I say that? I can say that as long as I don't
Yeah,
get.
I think, to be honest, his lawyers are unlikely to kind of hunt us down. So we've looked a little bit at the past there and how we've come to be sort of where we are. So if we look at the transition period, because as Simon hinted in the run-in, with us it's results day one and pack your bags day two. There's quite a run-in in the American system. So
Yeah.
how have you viewed this transition, comparing it to 2017 and possibly to some of the other transitions that there have been before?
Yes, in this country we're quite brutal. There's there's a waiting van, they kick you out, they're in the next morning, basically, after seeing the king or queen, whatever it happens to be. In America, it's always been different because it's such a big country. They don't just have to kind of just take over as prime minister or president in this case. They have to take over a whole bureaucracy as well. There is a civil service in America, but they also put in a lot of political appointments as well. So going back to the 18th century, it used to take forever to get across the country to get to Washington, D.C. So it used to be the inauguration was the following March. So what's that, 5 months after the election? Because it would take ages to count everything, and then they would have to confirm it in the Congress, and then they'd have to travel across kind of the wilderness or the frontier, and then they would be inaugurated in March. Although the first one, George Washington, was actually inaugurated in April, so it was even later. So that was to do with distance and time and putting lots of people into place. When you get to Franklin Roosevelt, 1932, he said it took too long for him to be inaugurated. America was in the midst of a Great Depression, so people just wanted him to become president. So rather than wait 5 months, they had the 20th Amendment and they decided the president would come in within 2 months. So they shortened that time period. So it's always been since 1937, the 20th of January, unless it's a Sunday, and then he put it off to the Monday, because obviously they'll all be in church, obviously. Um, so they still need that time in order to put a team together. It's very complex in the United
Mm.
States. Whereas here, Keir Starmer was already in Parliament. He already had a shadow cabinet, so they can take those positions quite quickly. That's not in the United States. Donald Trump is not in Congress. He doesn't have a shadow cabinet, so he has to collect all those people together. It's quite different from 8 years ago when Donald Trump came in before, because I think one, it was a shock to him that he won, a
Mm.
shock to Republicans. So he relied very heavily on the Republican Party to put in party political figures for Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary, all those kinds of things. Now, Donald Trump is much more confident in being president, having done it before, having thought about it for 4 years and kind of president in exile as he sees himself. So he's putting in a lot more kind of place people that he's much more confident that will just do what he says, I think. So in that way, it's a lot more, he's more confident, he's a lot more competent, perhaps because he was completely incompetent before. And he'd had, what, 3 or 4 Secretary of States, people kept resigning, or they got sacked. So it was a big turnover of people. So it's very different. I think he's put in a lot of place people. The Republican Party is his party now. I
Mm.
think the old Republican Party is gone. So it is, the party is in his image. So a lot of kind of yes men that will do his particular, or yes women, that will do his particular thing. So in that way, I think it's going to be a different kind of administration.
And if we look at the transition period, is there anything about this that's particularly notable when compared to previous transition periods?
Um, in some ways, it's a lot more civilized because President Biden is a lot more civilized and he believes in the symbols of power. So he did turn up to the inauguration. He met with Donald Trump when he turned up to the White House and they talked together, even though they're great rivals, of course. Which, of course, Donald Trump didn't do in 2020. He refused to meet Biden, refused to accept the results, and he left Washington before Inauguration Day. So it's very different. This is a peaceful transfer of power. If Kamala Harris had won, probably the Trump people wouldn't have accepted it. It would have been a very different. It would have been a peaceful transfer of power, of course, because Biden is president, passing over to his vice president. Um, so in that way, it's quite a traditional handover of power, very different from 2017 when it was seen as a, oh my God, what's he going to do? There was a million woman march, I think, the same week as the inauguration of Trump, and very different from 2020, 21, when there were basically riots.
Mm. So
Uh,
a more peaceful transition,
Absolutely, which
but
is tends to happen in the United States throughout the 20th century. There's a couple of battles in the 19th century. They had a civil war when they couldn't agree with Lincoln being inaugurated. The South didn't like that, so they seceded from the Union. But generally, there's a very peaceful transfer of power, and the ex-president is usually there on inauguration day, except Trump in 2021, Woodrow Wilson in 1921 or 100 years ago, but he was ill. So usually there is that symbolic transfer of power. The old president is there to kind of oversee the transfer of power. Trump doesn't care about things like that. However, Biden's done it all quite nicely because he believes in, those democratic conventions.
Simon.
Well, quite.
Okay, so yeah, after that, so social media continues to play a big role in our public discourse, for good or for ill. What's your thoughts on the sorts of interventions that we've seen from Musk?
I think the history on this is going to have to be written, I think, but it looks to me, we know he's given at least, what was it, $250 million, is it? Or quarter of a million? He's given a lot of money anyway to the Trump campaign. And there's probably a lot of money which we don't know about. We'd call dark money because in America, elections aren't regulated like they are in Europe. And in Britain, we don't always know where all this money has come from. But because of social media and its kind of takeover by those right-wing individuals, Musk and so forth, I think he's got a lot of free media, which means there's, 10, goodness knows how much kind of free media he's got through the traditional media and also social media. But when Musk bought Twitter a couple of years ago, everybody thought he was insane to do that it wasn't a good business move. But now it doesn't look like X, as it became known, as you know. It probably wasn't a business venture. It was actually a propaganda machine for Trump and for Elon Musk, and it's been spectacularly successful. The same with Facebook, although they've kind of jumped on board quite late, and all the other kind of social media. They're obsessed with Donald Trump. And in some ways, probably we all are, because, he is good entertainment value. There was a book that came out in the early 1980s called Entertaining Ourselves to Death, and it was to do with the American political system. And it's just got worse since then. We're just entertained by politicians and everything else. And if they entertain us, they tend to get elected. Why Elon Musk has suddenly come out for Trump, I'm sure, is to do with his businesses overall, although there's some business interests which conflict with what Trump wants to do. During his inauguration speech, Trump said that he was going to suspend all money coming from the government for the infrastructure for electric cars. And of course, with Tesla, Elon Musk is a big pusher of electric cars, if I can put it that way.
Mm.
However, what Trump also talked about was, this is when it all gets a bit sci-fi. Trump also talked about going to Mars, and Elon Musk is big on rockets going to Mars, and he's talked about Mars being a new kind of frontier and a great democracy and, the next frontier, really. It's all utterly bizarre stuff. So I think what social media is doing, and I've tried to look behind this, it's not just a huge propaganda machine, but it is to confirm those billionaires' position in American society. Despite most of them being immigrants, which of course Donald Trump has kind of railed against. And now, of course, Elon Musk is also going to be head of DOGE, which is the Department of Government Efficiency. So he will have a place in the White House. He's got his own office in the White House. So, being close to power, in which he's going to try to make cutbacks in government spending, apparently. So this is the billionaires aren't just funding American politics. They're actually moving into positions of power as well now. So I don't know if that answers the question, but social media is it's power, it's money, it's propaganda.
Well, I guess to be honestly, the genie's out of the bottle, isn't it, with
Yeah.
social media, and it's never going back in. Um, Now, interestingly, in the social media space, the 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 sort of staged end of TikTok and its resurrection this morning. I mean, uh, that just, I mean, I think everyone was confused about that in terms of, you know, I don't know whether that's a rival platform to X or something different, but it all just seems slightly absurd.
It is. It's utterly, it's Alice in Wonderland politics, because who actually brought up the idea that TikTok was a foreign influence in America via China? It was Trump who said it had to be destroyed about 2 years ago. It
Mm.
went into Congress. They held meetings about it and interviewed the head of TikTok and all these kind of things. Um, and now Trump has turned around and said, well, actually, it'll probably be okay. He's for TikTok now. So it's a constant trying to understand what exactly MAGA movement is against. But it has been said that perhaps TikTok will be sold to an American company, and that American company might be, oh, hold on, Elon Musk and X.
Ah.
So it might be a business transaction. And of course, then it'll be a monopoly. America used to be quite good with monopolies because it used to break them up, saying it was
Mm.
uncapitalist, anti-capitalist, and you needed competition. But again, Trump is going to get rid of a lot of these regulations. So actually, Elon Musk, being in the heart of government, in the heart of the White House, I'm not saying he's going to take over X, but that certainly has been suggested. Sorry, he's taken over X. He's going to take over TikTok. That's a huge monopoly and control of information.
Indeed, and it is that piece where, you know, when we look through that lens, it you know it does it can, you don't have to you don't have to make too many join too many more dots before you
Mm.
get into an Orwellian 1984 scenario.
Oh yeah, we're well on the way.
So so if we jump back to the process piece, I mean, one of the things that we found fascinating this week when we looked at it is the original plan was to do this outdoors, and then there was the,
Oh yeah.
or we better move it indoors because it's liable to be a bit cold in Washington in January. Now, I know we as a team didn't do very well forecasting the result, but I think all of us would have been spot on that an outdoor event in the middle of January probably would be a tad nippy. Is
Yeah.
there any reason behind why it's usually done outdoors, or is it just that's what they always did?
Um, this is because there's no the American tradition of inaugurations. All it says in the Constitution is that you need the oath of office. Put your hand up and say that you will fight enemies, foreign, domestic. You will sustain laws, all that kind of stuff. That's all you have to do. It's a couple of lines long. So everything else comes from traditions, which we think goes back centuries, but some of them are incredibly new. So George Washington wasn't didn't have his inaugurations in Washington because Washington wasn't built by that time. It was just a swamp.
Yep.
And you're right, Washington is always cold or it's really hot. It goes between those two extremes. So Washington was inaugurated in New York City and then Philadelphia. The first president who was inaugurated was John Adams, the second president in 1797. That was in the House of Representatives in Congress. So they just used that building. Um, After that, it you it was outside Congress, so people could come along and witness it. Because
Yep.
obviously, America being a young republic, a young democracy, people could come along and see their president being inaugurated, all part of that kind of democratic kind of myth. But it doesn't need to be outside. It doesn't need to have the Supreme Court justice there. It doesn't need any kind of religious ceremony. You don't need any of that. You just need the oath taking. However, because the United States president is the only nationally elected figure, there's a lot of symbolism around it. So usually
Mm.
it's a day of unity. They usually swear on the Bible, that you can choose their own particular Bible. But that's not important either, because the Constitution says you should have separation of church and state. So you could swear allegiance on the Constitution or the Quran or Coca-Cola if you want to. There's nothing in the Constitution saying you have to put your hand on anything, because there's a separation between church and state. You don't need, so there's no religious kind of connections at all. Um, just check my notes. In 1985, Ronald Reagan took the inauguration indoors to the Rotunda, where it was done today, because that was one of the coldest winters, apparently, of the 20th century. Ronald Reagan was seen as quite old at the time. He was in his mid-70s, about 73, 74, when his second inauguration in 1985. So they held it indoors. I also think he was getting a bit ill by that point as well, but that was kind of hidden from the American public, which might tell us something about Biden. Biden, we know Biden went cuckoo, but also might tell us something about Trump as well. 1945, Franklin Roosevelt got his fourth inauguration, was undertaken in the White House, but America was at war by that time, Second World War.
Yeah.
So it was seen as wasting a lot of money just to hold a big inauguration. So it was seen as, there was rationing and stuff going on. So his fourth inauguration was just done in the White House. Famously, William Henry Harrison, 1841, the ninth president of the United States. It was a cold day. He gave his inauguration, the longest inauguration in history. It went over 2 hours. It was said he caught cold from that, but he probably caught cold a couple of days later because he would wander around Washington, D.C. without his coat on. He was getting on a bit. He caught the flu or cold or something. He went into a coma, and he died a month into his presidency. So in that way, I think he's one of the best presidents. Could do no harm. He went straight into a coma and died a month in. So it's seen as kind of probably
So his inauguration killed him, is basically what you're saying.
His inauguration pretty much killed him. It was probably because he wandered around without his coat for the next couple of days as well. But so he gave a really long inauguration speech. George Washington, his first inauguration, 1793. That was the shortest. So it was 135 words long. You can say what you like about George Washington, but he always kept things short, to the point, and just got on with business.
And having caught bits of it, it all seemed very extended and a touch theatrical. I guess I guess it's that difference between the UK and the US. At half time in the FA Cup final, everybody goes in, drinks a mug of tea, has a slice of orange, and comes back out 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
And the Super Bowl has an hour and a half show with everything. So it did
Oh
all.
gosh, yes. I
did
mean,
did
we don't really remember inaugural speeches. Let's be absolutely honest. Everybody thinks it's a really big deal, and it's time for the president to set the agenda for the nation, the tone of government, but nobody really remembers anything. I mean, we probably remember a few of them. Lincoln's inauguration, 1865, Malice Towards None, but we're probably forgetting that one. That was, the end of the Civil War. FDR, 1933, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, which again is a bit of nonsense. No, you don't. You have poverty, the Great Depression, fascism, lots of things to fear. But, it was kind of setting the tone. JFK, 1961, asked not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you. So we don't remember many of them, to be absolutely honest. But they are seen as a great state occasion, because perhaps America doesn't have many of those, because they don't have, a king, queen, that kind of stuff. So America had to invent its own kind of self-importance, I guess.
it certainly is fascinating, Simon.
So there's a couple of kind of parallels that I'd kind of noticed with a previous. You mentioned it about the Reagan, about the changing from Carter to Reagan, and in January 1981, the release of the American hostages in Iran was reportedly delayed until Reagan had come to office. Obviously, what's recently been in the news has been the ceasefire. Wouldn't it? It was delayed by moments for over a couple of details, and then coming to action. But Is the Israel-Gaza ceasefire, is it victory for Trump or is it victory for Biden?
I'm going to be absolutely honest. I'm not entirely sure at this point.
Mm.
This kind of peace deal has been up at least around since about May,
Yeah.
that I can tell.
Hmm.
So it could be, and this sounds entirely plausible, that Trump kept putting this off so it would get towards Inauguration Day. He certainly mentions it in his inauguration speech.
Hmm.
It's the only time that Biden and Kamala Harris stood up and applauded. He didn't need help. Biden managed to get up by himself
Hmm.
without any assistance. Um, so in that way, he might have put this off, so it could be seen that he's kind of bringing in an age of peace, which is
Hmm.
utterly bizarre. However, a lot of this is to do with Biden, really, I think. But he did keep, from what I could tell, and I did look this up this morning, he did keep the Trump administration on board. He did take on a special envoy from Trump. I've forgotten his name. I apologize. So the incoming Trump administration was kept on board with it all. So in that way, if Trump had said no, I'm not going to accept that peace treaty, it would have been um, thrown to the wall. It wouldn't have been successful. So in that way, it's kind of split between them.
Mm.
But certainly, it seems as though Trump has delayed this, so it looks like it's entirely his influence. But of course, Trump says everything is to do with him if it's a good thing, and if it's not, it's immigrants, it's
Yeah, it's
transgender people, or whoever it happens to be.
yeah.
This also happened you're absolutely right, 1981 with
Mm.
Reagan, his first inauguration. But Trump went behind and this is being documented, went behind the Carter administration
So
and
Reagan went behind the Carter administration. So, yeah.
yeah, told the Iranian government they'd get a better deal with him,
Right. Oh,
which of
okay.
course is insane
Yeah.
and technically treasonous. But this is also what Nixon did in 1968. He let the North Vietnamese know that they'd get a better deal from him rather than having a peace deal with Lyndon Johnson in 1968. Again, this has all been documented.
Mm.
So tends to be Republicans tend to do that. And it's not seen as, it's not seen as very gentlemanly, but, it's good optics. And of course, Carter was seen as a terribly failed president. And as we know, he's just died. There's still a state of mourning in the United States. When Carter was inaugurated, he's, I think, the only president to walk from Congress back to the White House after he's been inaugurated, because he was seen as taking government back to the people. He said he would never lie to the American people,
Hmm.
which, let's be honest, is a daft thing to say if you're a politician, really.
Mhm.
Um, so Reagan coming in is showing that he's much more professional. He can get things done. The Iranian hostage situation didn't do any favors to Carter during the 1980 election. In fact, Carter was seen as pretty incompetent, I think, during that kind of time period.
Yeah,
So
he
you,
didn't seem to kind of do very well, but maybe, I don't know, maybe reading between the lines, and we'll probably we'll never know that, you know, maybe the whole thing of like, well, you won't actually get a better deal with me, but you should leave it till now until because of X, Y, Z. We'll just never know to fill in the
Yes,
cracks, will
and
we?
quite often this is very unofficial
Hmm.
as well. And what we have to remember, the Iran-Contra affair, which I won't go into here because it's mind-blowingly insane. But Ronald Reagan was selling weapons to the Iranian government.
Yeah.
And that money he sent to the Contra rebels in Nicaragua, which Congress said he couldn't do. He should have been impeached over that. So Reagan actually has form
Hmm.
in these kind of very strange dealings. You might say, well, foreign policy is that kind of weird, and you have to deal with your enemy on occasion. But in public, Ronald Reagan was saying Carter was just foolish to be able to try to deal with these people. But Reagan's a much luckier president. You might say more competent. I think that's fair enough. Um, Carter was perhaps before his time with his kind of environmental policies and those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
well, indeed, and
So go on in.
no, I was just going to say you mentioned optics there, and obviously, if we look over the last few weeks, the Gulf of Mexico is about to become the Gulf of America. Greenland
Oh,
and the Panama Canal. Not sure what Trump's liking either of those. Return to drilling for oil. It's been a really a spectacular list
Yeah.
of and I think he mentioned it in his inauguration speech. No more wars. I think humanity's been pushing for that for a while. Um,
Absolutely.
if we look at that, uh, I love the phrase. It's mine. I'll trademark it. A potpourri of hyperbole.
Oh,
Very
How
that
much.
many?
trips off the tongue very nicely.
What,
Gilbert
what can
O'Sullivan
you
would have been
say?
proud.
What can you say about that list?
Um, it's quite an impressive list. But he didn't do all these things in his first term. So one of the questions I would say is, why didn't you do that in your first term?
Mm.
If you make America great immediately. So a lot is that, his supporters will support him anyway. He doesn't get to call the Gulf of Mexico anything apart from Gulf of Mexico because America doesn't decide what things are called. So I'm not sure what kind of international body does that. But if there's an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, at least it'll be more honest now. It will be an oil spill in the Gulf of America. But America is a very broad term as well, the whole of the Americas. I have a friend from Brazil who goes, I'm American. He keeps telling me. Americans are, they're USA. America is a
Mhm.
broad term for North and Central and South America. But again, that's hyperbole, a potpourri of hyperbole. I like that because it's very poetic, if you don't mind me saying.
No worries.
It's
Um,
not like him.
gonna, yeah. Drilling for oil, what was it? Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
He's opening up Alaska. This is probably why he wants Greenland, or at
Mm.
least, I can't see him invading Greenland particularly. I mean, this isn't the 19th century or, 1901 or anything. But he probably wants to buy up a lot of the resources there. There's also a lot of lithium there, so I looked up.
Mm.
I'm not entirely sure what lithium is, but it's a lot of that is used in phones, things like that,
Yeah.
and technology. So that might be an Elon Musk thing as well, going to that. So there's a lot of connections and lots of dots to be made here. He wants to get the Panama. He says he wants to invade and get the Panama Canal back, which seems utterly
Yeah,
bizarre.
Gary said this in the speech, didn't he? That we gave it to them, and we're going to
Yeah.
take it back because basically they've given it to China. They, as in Panama, which
Yes.
yeah. I mean, the
Well, as the
British can
Americans
advise
said,
on how foolish it is to try to grab a canal.
well, yes, and that is end of empire stuff, as we all know, going back to 1956, 57, that kind of time period. America did, this was one of the marvels of the modern era is the
Mm.
building of the Panama Canal, kind of going through rocks and
Mhm.
blowing up the whole of Central America to put a canal through, connect the Pacific with the Atlantic, which was good for American military because they could
Mhm.
just get to the other, to the Pacific much easier and the Atlantic, just going through the canal. It was good for American business. But it was Jimmy Carter, going back to him. This is probably something in what Trump was talking about. These are Democrats, they betray our country. So it was Carter that actually did the treaty to give Panama Canal back to the Panamanians.
Mm.
And it was handed back in 1999, which was Bill Clinton. So the reason he mentions it is probably that Democrats betray our national interests. We stole it fair and square, as the Republicans said way back in the day. And Republicans will take it back because it was Theodore Roosevelt, 1901, that first sent the American Navy in to ensure that America could seize it.
And you
And
mentioned,
Theodore Roosevelt's a much more interesting president than in many ways. He's an environmentalist. Yes, he was an imperialist, but he sets up all the public parks in America. He's a really interesting president. Whereas Trump, not so much in that kind of mode. Oh, what Trump did mention in his speech was William McKinley, which is a president that no one's ever heard of. Um, but William McKinley is really big on the American right. What I would call the far right, not the kind of old Reaganite kind of right. Because William McKinley raised tariffs. He was anti-immigration and so forth. So it's the president that they all tend to go back to. He also mentions he wants to rename a mountain in Alaska the McKinley Mountain because under Obama, a Democratic president, renamed it after a Native American tribe. I forget what it was called. That's bad of me, isn't it? Probably wrote it down somewhere. But Obama allowed Native Americans to rename this mountain, but apparently Trump is going to rename it McKinley Mountain,
Has anyone told the
which I would
mountain?
say, yeah, no, Mountain doesn't care. Mountain will be there forever.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was getting all philosophical then.
No,
Forget
Yeah, yeah,
that.
that's
no. I think it's probably I've led you on my hyperbolic path into trying to do the rest of the show in haiku. But you mentioned business there, and tariffs, I understand, is a beautiful word. It's one of the most beautiful words.
a favourite word.
I,
One of
I
his favorite words.
well, and I guess, if I'm being agent provocateur here, um, economically, the America First approach of his first term did seem to bring quite a lot of economic stimulus to America. And, I guess there's that element of, if you're gonna if you're gonna make dirty steel using fossil fuel, is there an element of pricing your competition out of the market by applying tariffs to Chinese steel?
Well, quite. America has always done this. So it's always made things more expensive to come into the country so they could develop their own industrial base. In fact, America might have become great in the first place because of those kinds of tariffs.
Hmm.
However, I would say that didn't work for Herbert Hoover, who in 1929 had to confront the Great Depression. He put on even harder tariffs, bigger tariffs rather. He was anti-immigrant, and that didn't do America any good whatsoever. I would say it was the Second World War, which really allows America to become the dominant
Hmm.
and only superpower really that was still standing. Russia was in terrible economic kind of straits after the Second World War. So in that way, and I've gone back and checked this, under Biden and Donald Trump, growth in America was about 2.5%. Under George W. Bush and Obama, it was about it's kind of all over the place, but about 1.9%. So you might say there's not much difference between Democrats and Republicans when it
Hmm.
comes to actual growth in the economy, even though they have different approaches. Biden, I think, had a more FDR approach of infrastructure spending, although he didn't talk about that much, and it takes a long time for that to kind of go through. Whereas Donald Trump, George W. Bush, you lower taxes, you put kind of an adrenaline shot into the economy. And both might achieve growth, and it depends if you're on the right or the left, which you think is better. Both have different social consequences as well, is the issue, I would say.
Yeah, and it is clear from a lot of the research that I did, in the sort of post-election result, that it would appear that the ordinary American felt they had been better off under the first.
Yeah.
I mentioned that placebo effect earlier. Is there something in that, in terms of actually it's not necessarily about the money in your pocket, but it's how you feel? I guess I'm still kind of searching around for
Yes.
so good they backed him twice.
Well, quite. I think there's something in that. I think this is an emotional response to Trump, to make America great again, which isn't the first time that phrase has been used. Ronald Reagan used it, and it goes back to Calvin Coolidge and back to the beginning of the 20th century. So it's being used every now and then. People felt well off in 1984, so they gave, Reagan, and again, he lowered taxes, cut spending, didn't do anything about, there's a lot of poverty in America. Poverty widened, but people generally felt a lot more positive. So is that psychological effect that America is still engaged, and God is on its side? It's called American exceptionalism, that America feels that it is unique in the world. So it's an emotional response to voting, which we shouldn't underestimate in this country or in other places. So in that way, I think you're absolutely right that people felt much better off under Trump in his first administration, even though Obamacare was undermined. So it's difficult to get health insurance, particularly if you had a chronic disease, these kind of things. But let's be honest, since the 1980s, poverty in America, inequality in America has just got wider and wider and wider. So Democrat or Republican, haven't particularly reversed that particular thing, and now the billionaires are just directly taken over. And let's be honest, the Democratic Party has its own billionaires, so it's not like they're just coming out for the Republicans.
No,
No, I
no,
guess
no.
there's no point.
No.
If you have to tell people that they've got it better off, then you've lost the argument already, haven't you? If you have to
Absolutely.
remind them actually things weren't as bad as you remember,
Yeah.
you've already.
And actually, they're probably better off under Biden. But he didn't raise the federal minimum wage. He said he was going to raise it to $15, and then he said it was too difficult, so it remained at what, $7.25, which is a really rubbish wage.
Mm,
So the on statistically speaking, America is much better off under Biden. However, people didn't feel that way, and I can understand that because it's inflation. When you go out and you buy whatever it happens to be, it could be oil, it could be butter,
yeah,
or whatever it happens to
a
be.
rifle.
A rifle. That's probably the best example. That's when we actually see it. So we're being told it's better off, but actually we don't particularly feel that way.
No,
And I think Biden got caught with that. And that was all to do with COVID, of course, because we also got caught with this.
mm,
So you pump the economy to keep it going so it doesn't collapse during COVID, increases inflation, then you have to spend 3 or 4 years getting rid of inflation. I mean, I'm not an economist,
mhm.
so it's kind of tentative in my own mind, but it
Yep.
seems to be it's happening around the world. And again, that, of course, the incumbents are going to get the blame for that. That's
Yeah,
just
I mean,
logical to me.
they seem to make a political football of blaming the president for the price of gas or petrol, as we would call it. Whereas
Yeah.
the federal government doesn't mandate the price of petrol.
No. And America is a major exporter of oil.
Mm,
So to actually just dig up more oil, that doesn't go to the American public. Trump isn't going to nationalize BP and all the kind of major
no.
oil industries. So that will go to private companies, and that might bring prices down. The National Reserve, certainly the president can buy a lot more oil from the National Reserves and then release it, so it will bring down the price of oil. But I mean, technically, Biden could have done that because he's drilled for more oil than any president in American history, despite saying, this Green New Deal and all that kind of stuff that he talks about. So Biden has also drilled for more oil and fracked for more. Is it fracking? Never
Yes.
sounds right when I say that. Fracked for more oil than even Trump did. And during the 2024 election, Kamala Harris said she was going to do even more. So they were all just running. And I think this really shows that America is a kind of dying empire because they just keep chasing the old dream, which was oil and steel, rather than looking towards the future and for kind of new sources, which is what China's doing. China now is at the forefront of, green energy, although it's still kind of building all those kind of coal
Yeah.
power stations and whatnot. But America seems to have let other nations take over from that, which seems decidedly odd considering America sees itself as innovative and at the forefront of technology.
Well, you can't innovate if you keep looking to the past.
Exactly. I think this shows a dying empire, basically, if you keep looking to the past.
I mean, it
They
works so well
start to
for us.
ossify.
So thinking again, kind of back to actually on the day, it kind of strikes me as the clock strikes 12. It's a bit like a daytime version of Cinderella. Clock strikes 12, and the old president basically converts. Their vehicle turns back into a pumpkin. It's a Cinderella thing. So is it literally just as cut as that? Literally, the guy, and I say guy because obviously they've all been guys up to this point. Arrives at the Capitol, a president, and then leaves an ordinary, quote unquote, ordinary man off to do his thing.
The nuclear codes, everything at 12 o'clock, as soon as the oath of office is read, everything shifts to the new president. It's that brutal. And Biden just has to leave by helicopter as quickly as possible, which I'm sure there's footage of that now. The vice president gets sworn in just like a minute before, but the new Congress, which got voted in the same day as the president, which was the 5th of November last year, they get sworn in at the beginning of January. So they get sworn in 2 weeks before. So there is a kind of shift of power to the new Congress,
Hmm.
Congress has a lot of political power in the United States, and then the president comes along 2 weeks after that. So it's kind of a gradual shift of political power to different institutions and different members of Congress. But yeah, 12 o'clock, that's it. He's president, he can do what he likes. He'll start signing executive orders, and he's already said that he's going to declare, what was it, a national emergency on the southern border.
Yeah.
He's going to send troops in. I've forgotten what the other things were. He's going to declare that there's only two genders because that's always useful to do, isn't it, on your first day? So the culture war
Hmm.
continues.
Yes.
It's just as it's a ridiculous issue, really, that gets people excitable, and it makes them look away at what's actually happening, I always think. Um, However, it's an effective strategy. So,
Mm.
effective politicians use effective strategies. But yes, it's we will see a lot of executive orders coming out from the presidency. He did
But it,
mention a kind of load of them.
but is that kind of a weird to because obviously the whole point of the American structure of government is that there's the three branches,
Yeah,
and that they're separate for a reason. Obviously, there's a slight difference this time because the Republicans have got such an overwhelming majority in both houses, and obviously they've got the presidency, so they're not competing against either of the houses that are controlled
yeah.
by another political party. But it just kind of seems that if it's kind of done all in that order, it kind of feels like that erodes the separation of the different
Yes,
powers of the state to do so much by diktat from the president. It feels quite
yeah.
quite like quite well king like quite like he's acting like a monarch in that respect. Or is that just
Well,
normal?
quite.
Do they do that a lot?
The American system was set up so a president couldn't become a monarch.
Mm.
And, George Washington said he didn't want to be king. He didn't want to be called Lord High
Mm.
President. He just wanted to be called Mr. President. So the beauty of the American system is it's meant to be checks and balances.
Mm.
If the president exceeds his power, he can be impeached.
Mm.
It's never been done successfully. Or Congress can stop him. They can pass legislation to stop him. They can cut money back from
Mm.
what the president's doing. They all have to kind of agree to get anything done. So the beauty of the system is that you can hardly ever get anything done.
Mm.
But now, so people always complain that the American system doesn't work because nothing gets done. I would say that's exactly what the founding fathers wanted to do. They wanted to ensure that nothing could get done unless it needed to be done, which means you have bipartisan support and you have general agreement.
Mm.
So you might have Congress, which might be Democrat, and you might have a Republican
Mm.
president, that they would have to compromise on the legislation they decide on. Um, Trump now has what we call the trifecta. The Republicans have the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. They have 53 seats in the Senate, so he should be able to get his cabinet because that
Mm.
all has to be voted on by the Senate. However, the House of Representatives, they've only got like two or three seats there. Um, and they're already quite fractious. So the House of Representatives might descend into chaos quite quickly.
Mm.
It's already been Republican for 2 years anyway, and they haven't got anything done in 2 years. They could barely agree on who should be Speaker. So the House of Representatives might reflect that actually the Republicans might disintegrate and start arguing amongst themselves quite quickly.
Well, I guess, Lee, that's probably not a bad place for us to wind that up because, as we discussed in the first show, that the whole beauty of the American system, complex it as it
Yeah,
is that element of um, it has the natural balances to stop anything going too mad one way or another. So,
yeah.
I guess I'm leaving this one with our message of hope being that the House of Representatives might descend into madness, and that will keep everything. In some sort of order and balance. Is that kind of
I
what we're
I
hoping
think
for?
so. Yes. So the chaos that Trump has brought forth might actually bring him down. But that's always the Greek tragedy, I think, of the presidency. Like
Uh,
Nixon, there's too much power. But
Mm.
there's new elections in 2026.
Yeah.
So it all starts again, midterms.
Absolutely.
So really, Trump only has a year to make his mark, really. And after that, he can't run again. And I think MAGA will start to break up because it's charismatic leadership. Once Trump isn't there,
Mm.
I don't think they have the leadership that they can coalesce around. I don't think there's a leader that can replace him.
So,
So
I'm
that
not.
way, it's more like a social movement than a political movement.
Well, and I think
Mm.
if that tells us one thing, Lee, then the future for lecturers in American history and politics looks safe for the next generation.
Oh
So
yes, I won't be losing my job yet.
no. So
These two
you've been
shall
listening
pass.
to exactly. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest today has been Lee Sartain from the Portsmouth University. Thank you very much, Lee. And I've been Simon Sansbury. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on Sunday when we're talking about local reorganisations of politics.
Oh God, the American equivalent, I think it's of what is the local government structure of the future. We've still got to do some research on that because it's nearly as complex as the American system, I think.
Well, we're trying to make sense of a thing that doesn't necessarily make sense, so that's possibly why. But either way, it's happening because, well, the government have decided it's happening. So whether people like it or not, understand it or not, it's going to happen. But let's talk about that on Sunday, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have some representatives from across the area to talk to us about what the pros and cons are for their particular authorities as we look forward to, a potential elected mayor at some point.
Oh joy.
Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.